Today we're going over the RPA. Is to teach the fundamentals about completing the contract. You can go over strategies with your coach, but this is just the fundamentals of how to complete it, what should be done to be in compliance, depending on the market, the particular property that can change. So I'll touch a little bit on strategy, but mainly go over that with your productivity coach. Agent expectations, have your camera on, participate in the class. If you have questions, please feel free to come off mute and ask any question that you may have. Be prepared. And then also this does count towards your graduation. And so they will be taking attendance and it'll count towards your launch graduation. So be sure to participate and ask questions and take notes. If you would like a copy of all the material that we go over in the class, feel free to shoot me an email, lisa.hodge@kw.com. It's here at the bottom. Send me an email right when class ends, and I will send you directly over all the material that's covered today. Okay, any questions on that? All right, perfect. We will go ahead and get started. So today we're covering the residential purchase agreement, the RPA, and we'll go ahead and take it from the top. Always add in here date prepared. Okay, date prepared. If you click on it, that is the date will automatically populate. We do look at date prepared and the date signed, so just be sure that this is not omitted. That's a common mistake that agents make. Excuse me. Oh, sneeze. Okay. Offer, client's name. So what I'm going to do is first and last name of the buyer, property address, city, county, zip code, and APN. Does everybody know where to find the assessor parcel number? So you can find it on MLS when you pull up the property. So the property that you're writing an offer on, it is located, the APN is located there. So be sure to add that in. Some people also omit that from the contract as well. Seller's broker firm. Okay. And we mark here if the seller is representing the seller or both both buyer and seller. So dual agency. So if you were representing both the listing side and the buy side, then you would mark there. But for this example, we're going to do specifically one listing agent representing the seller and another brokerage, our brokerage representing the buyer. Let's see. Okay. So seller's brokerage firm, the name, their license number, listing agent name, and license number as well. These are made up, so the information is not correct. So buyer's brokerage firm, Keller Williams, Sac Metro, and that is correct. That is our license number there. Buyer's agent, Lisa Hodge, and that is my license number there as well. And we have marked here, buyer's agent is representing just the buyer only. Okay, if there were more than one brokerage representing the seller or buyer, which doesn't happen that often, but it can, additional ABA form, additional agent acknowledgement, additional brokerage acknowledgement would be filled out, but we don't typically use that. It's not very common, but if it is required, if you do have another buyer's agent also involved in the transaction, that's where you would mark that box, but it's not very common. Okay, so we're going down here to terms and conditions. Our purchase price, let's use 600,000, not 60,000, 600,000. If it were all cash, you would mark that box here. For this example, we're doing financing, so I'm not going to mark the all cash box here. Close of escrow. So typically, a standard escrow timeframe is 30 days. It can be shortened depending on the market, depending on the time frame that your buyer can close. If your buyer can close quickly to make it more appealing or a more aggressive offer, you can shorten it to 21 days. And that would be kind of something that's you can still get all your inspections done, appraisal done, and still be able to close. 15 days is very aggressive, especially with financing. So 30 days is standard. 21 days is kind of an aggressive time frame, but it makes your offer look stronger. 15 is like really good on a finance deal. And then if you have cash, so cash, It's not uncommon to do a 2-week escrow, 15 days, 10-day close of escrow because it is cash. So that eliminates the requirement for an appraisal, which usually takes time, and the financing requirement, which takes time. So really, when you're purchasing, you have an all cash buyer, really all you're doing is checking the condition of the property. So you could go the next day, do your inspections and investigations and satisfy that condition. So it can be done a lot quicker. So on a cash transaction, this stay is going to be shortened. The reason for the 30 days is typically just because of financing, getting loan approval, and appraisal timeframe. Okay. Expiration of offer, 3 calendar days after the buyer signs it, it expires. Okay. That means that if the seller came back afterwards, say it expires, and the seller comes back with different terms and does a counter, but maybe buyer wants to renegotiate, you can say, hey, that offer expired. We're going to send in a new offer with different terms. Okay. So it doesn't bind the buyer to that if the seller does delay. Okay. So we typically don't see that happen. It can happen. But that's the reason for the expiration date is the buyer can say, hey, we actually changed our mind because you took 5 days to respond, right? So that's one option. The second option, when we do fill out the expiration date, it can be used to your benefit if, say, for example, you go and show your client a property and it has just a few days on the market, but your client wants it really bad, and you write a very, very aggressive offer, and maybe it's over list price, and you're giving them all that they want, and you want them to make sure that that they accept our offer. Okay. So you send it in right now and you're like, okay, you have until noon tomorrow to accept the offer or we're moving on because the buyer is relocating. They need the house. You have until tomorrow to respond. If not, then it expires and that's it. Right. So that's in that instance, you can use that. Okay. It's not typical most of the time. It is just left blank and all of these numbers are already added in 3 calendar days and it automatically expires. Initial deposit, typically standard is 1% of the purchase price. Okay. It can be lower or it can be higher. Just keep in mind the higher that you go, this earnest money deposit, once all contingencies are removed, this could potentially be non-refundable. And so the higher amount, the higher at risk they are to losing more. And then you look at it from a listing agent perspective. And if they only have a $1,000 or I've seen even $500 earnest money deposit, it means they don't have a lot to lose. And so they could tie up the property for 17 days while they do their inspections and maybe drag it on a little longer because you have to send the cancellation. And really they're not out a whole lot, in 500 or $1,000. But if they have 6,000. Okay, that would probably hurt a little bit if they lost that, right? Or 10,000 or even $15,000. Those deposits, they're going to think twice about performance. And so the buyer has a little bit more skin in the game. They have a little bit more invested because could be non-refundable. So they're handing it over and that earnest money deposit sits in an escrow. And that's why we pre-open escrow or we have escrow open. It is a neutral third party and the deposit is held by that. So it doesn't go to the seller. It is held in escrow and that amount when you close escrow, that will be applied towards the buyer's down payment or closing costs. And so that's where that earnest money goes. So is applied towards their down payment and closing costs. It's not an additional fee. It's just money up front that they're paying anyways. Okay. We don't typically see increased deposit. We can, it's very rare. If you run into a situation, we actually had one recently, and I walked the agent through that. If there is decreased deposit, contact me and then we can work through it because there's additional kind of things that go along with it. But we don't typically use that. So I'm going to leave it blank. Okay, so loan amount. So let's just, for purposes of the training, let's say it's an FHA loan. And so then the loan amount is going to be 96.5% of the purchase price, right? Because FHA requires a 3.5% down payment. And so the loan amount is going to be minus the 3.5%, which is 96.5%. So loan amount is actually for $579,000. Okay. And so we'll mark FHA here, and those additional forms get attached automatically, which is great. You don't have to go back in and attach them. Okay, so first loan amount, 96.5% of purchase price, which will add up here down at the bottom, purchase price total. So that'll add up to 600,000. If it's a different number, you have a problem, right? The loan amount's different. So it should all add up here. Okay. Jumping back up here to interest rate, fixed rate, or if it was an adjustable rate, you can mark there. Not to exceed, and you can put a percent there. Say it's a 5.65%, and say the buyer's paying a point to obtain the loan. So this just gives you a little bit of added reason for contingency, because if the rates hop up, right, and they can't pay the points down, and they're only qualified with the rate of 5.65%, and say rates are at 6%, they can't qualify. This is a reason that the buyer can cancel, and it's just a stronger reason the buyer is able to get their deposit back, right? Because if the sellers say, nope, we're selling it no matter what, and you agree to it, and you're like, well, wait, we haven't moved contingencies, and then they're like, well, what's the reason you're canceling? And you're like, well, we got a loan and we put it in the purchase offer that the buyer couldn't pay because their debt to income ratio a rate higher than 5.65%, and they're buying the rate down. Well, the rate 6%, they can't qualify. So it just gives a stronger reason for the buyer, just adds that extra assurance in place. Okay, so you can add that in. You don't have to add it in. It's probably 50-50. 50% of the time I see it, 50% of the time I don't. Sometimes it's the agent doesn't have the full information from the lender. Maybe the lender has provided the pre-approval, but they haven't given full terms. So we always ask for it, but it's not always readily available when we're writing the offer. So you can leave it blank, or you can add it in. But for the purpose of that, I'm just going to leave it out. Okay. And so this is also sufficient. So loan amount, the percentage of the purchase price. Okay. We have FHA marked. Now, we have this added time frame in of 17 days. You can shorten it. That FHA or VA to deliver a list of lender required repairs. So this gives an added contingency that the seller is acknowledging up front that this is FHA or a VA loan, which means there are additional lender required steps that they might have to take. So if you get an appraisal, that is FHA, it comes with certain added layers, right? FHA, if you get an appraisal, if a seller accepts a FHA offer and they get an FHA appraisal, and that appraisal calls out for dry rot to be fixed, health and safety items, maybe a window has to be installed because a room doesn't have a window, right? And say the deal doesn't go through, the seller, that appraisal still stays with the property. So it doesn't matter who the next buyer is. That appraisal that has been done stays with the property. And so then the next FHA buyer will also, they still have to pay, unfortunately, even though it's been done, but that appraisal will still stick with the property. And so this is letting the seller know, hey, by accepting this, you're agreeing to this. Now, the seller does not have to make these repairs. It's just saying they have to deliver, our buyer has to deliver a list of lender required repairs to the seller within 17 days or however many days after acceptance, if we shorten that contingency period. Okay. Because there could be additional things that the lender requires to be fixed. Like I mentioned, dry rot, health and safety, if there's a broken fence, if there are missing smoke detectors. If there are things that do not pass FHA, then they will call it out. Then a reinspection will need to be done. Okay, moving along here, additional finance. If we don't see this a lot, okay, this is like a second mortgage on the property. So if your client's buying it, if they are getting perhaps a Cal HFA or a second type loan, then the information would go here. So if there was additional loan, additional amount financed, then the information would go here. Okay. And then occupancy type, if it's a primary residence, leave it blank. If it's a second home, mark there for second home, or investment property, you would mark there for investment property. Okay. Any questions on terms? This is the meat of it. So this is the most important part. So, okay, moving on then. So we're going on to from terms to seller payment to cover buyer expenses and costs. So if your buyer wants a credit from the seller, it would go in here. Okay, seller credit to buyer. Let's put 5,000. And it automatically has here for closing costs. So seller credit to buyer 5,000 for closing costs. Okay. If there were other seller credit or payment, so say the seller maybe indicated on MLS that they're going to pay for the carpet to be replaced, or they've said they're going to pay for the pool repairs because there's maybe the pool is, needs to be replastered. So if there's anything additional that was either discussed with the listing agent ahead of time that they've indicated that they're going to fix, or if there's something you see on MLS that in the private remarks it says, hey, seller is going to, before close of escrow, seller is going to, repair put the appliances back in the kitchen. So whatever it is, you would add that here if it's a credit or whatever amount. Okay. So you can add that in. Say the seller is going to pay for say there's a lien or something on the property. Seller will pay, X amount of dollars, and then you put what it is for. Okay. We don't typically use that, like I said, unless there's something specified or a different conversation you've had ahead of time with the listing agent. But if you're just asking for credit, it would be marked here, 5,000 or credit, or however much. Okay. Again, you could do 10,000, 15,000 credit, just depending on your buyer, depending on discussion with the listing agent. Okay. This one's important, seller to payment to compensate buyer's broker. Okay. So this is where you get paid. So do not forget to put that in here. You can add in whatever amount that you have on your BRBC or whatever you've discussed ahead of time with the listing agent discussions. If the listing agent has indicated, you can put 2.5%, but seller is probably not going to pay it. You can add whatever amount in there that is on your BRBC that you've discussed with your client ahead of time. So that amount there. And, or if it was a flat fee or something else, but typically it's just the percentage right here. Okay. This would be verification for all cash, down payment, or loan application. They're already added in. We have 3 days to provide all of those. Okay. And then I talk a lot about the difference between the pre-approval, pre-qual, and the fully underwritten pre-approval. A pre-qual is the lender has pulled credit, maybe had a discussion, like a buyer consult, and said, okay, yes, based on your job, you've worked for the state for, 15 years. Great. You have a great job. I pulled credit and your credit score is at 800. Fantastic. So based on that, yeah, you pre-qual, right? You could probably afford this house. And then, so the issues you run in with the pre-qual is maybe there's not all of that due diligence. So perhaps there's other debt that is owed. There's other, maybe the buyer, maybe they were off work last year. They were on disability, and then they're going to be off work in the future. So pre-qual is just based on the basic facts of the buyer. Okay. Pre-approval is pulled credit, verified income. You've checked, make sure that they do qualify, bank statements, tax returns. So all of the information has been verified, and they said, yes, based on this, you're pre-approved. Okay. Now so pre-qual, pre-approval, and fully underwritten pre-approval is when after the pre-approval, they say, yes, we have the bank statements, we have credit pulled, we have tax returns, we have pay stubs, everything looks good. Now it's going to go to underwriter. So the underwriter then takes a look at the file and says, okay, great. You're pre-approved, and then we will fully approve the loan based on, we need a letter of an explanation for this deposit of, $2,000 cash deposit, because where's that coming from? Is it a loan to buy the house? We need an updated, letter from your work explaining, whatever. So there's certain conditions based on the pre-approval. So a fully underwritten pre-approval is the underwriters looked at it and said, yes, it's good to go. Okay. So the strongest is a fully underwritten pre-approval. And most of the time you have a pre-approval. If you have a fully underwritten pre-approval, definitely use that as negotiating with the listing agent. Say, hey, it's fully underwritten. That means there's not going to be any surprises because it's already fully underwritten. Underwriters looked at it. They said they're good to go. All the conditions can be satisfied. Nothing else is going to come up. So it's just based on the property, right? Pre-qual is always, if you ever have a listing and you get someone that says we just have pre-qual, no, you need a fully, you need a pre-approval because that's not, like I said, those examples I gave. What if they were off work? What if something else happened? And so pre-approval or fully underwritten pre-approval.
I have a question about the fully written pre-approval. Is that something that our buyers or clients would go and ask for from their lender or their broker?
Yes, yes. And then you can have discussions with them as well. So if you have a buyer and you're like, okay, well, who's your lender? It's always good to make contact and say, fantastic. Hey, lender, I'm out with the Smiths and we're out looking at property this weekend. Hey, I see, they said that they've been pre-approved up to, 500,000, but hey, they sent me one 515. What are we looking like? Like what are we looking at? Do they need a credit for closing costs? Because sometimes buyers aren't always forthcoming with their finances. So they've indicated to the lender's seen everything, right? They've seen their credit score, but then sometimes maybe they don't want to tell us all of the dirty details, right? And so it's always good just to make contact with the lender ahead of time and say, hey, yeah, we're going to be looking this weekend, right? I always contact the lender when I'm out looking that weekend and I feel like we're probably going to write an offer. I say, hey, we're out looking this weekend. They really like, this house on Main Street. We could be writing an offer. Can you send me an updated pre-approval this weekend if we decide to write on it? So I like to make that contact ahead of time because when I write an offer, I have the lender update the pre-approval to the exact amount of my offer. So if I'm writing it at 615, I have a pre-approval amount to 650. I don't want them to see that we can go to 650. I'm like, write it for the exact amount. So yeah, I highly encourage to have those conversations with the lender ahead of time and say, hey, do you have is it a pre-approval? Are they fully underwritten? What type of due diligence has been done up front? Because sometimes buyers don't always know what's going on either. They're like, yep, we're good to go. And they're really not. Maybe they're like, maybe the lender said, hey, it looks like it, but you need to send me your pay stubs. You need to send me your bank statements. But the buyer's so excited because they heard, yes, and they took it as a green light. And, we don't, so it's always good to get clarification as to, because the buyer could have good intentions and maybe they're not being dishonest, but maybe they just misunderstood, what they can qualify for, right? Or where we're at with the price. So yeah, always good to make contact with the lender ahead of time. Okay. Um, okay. Final verification of condition of property. That's 5 days prior to close of escrow. That is the walkthrough. I always leave it at 5 unless there's some other reason that we would need to do a walkthrough before or after. But it's typically 5 is enough for that. If it was going to be assigned, we don't do a lot of those. But it can be, say I have a company and I'm going to purchase the property in, I don't know what company I'm going to put it in, right? So I would write the offer, Lisa Hodge or assignee, and I don't know what entity I'm going to purchase it in. So it could be, Hodge Real Estate, it could be under, Hodge Company LLC. So that's why you would use assignee. So assignment request. So it could be switched over to whoever else it's being assigned to, but that's typically when you use that assignment request. Okay, contingencies. This is the other big portion of it. So the main part, that first page has all the details, and then this is our kind of our second most important section here. So contingencies. This is the buyer's investigation. Okay. It's already pre-populated with 17 days, which covers the loan, appraisal, investigation of property, reviewing seller disclosures, the prelim, if there were any HOA docs, any leased or lien items like solar, if there's propane, etc. And then, yeah, so everything that goes along with investigating the property. Now, these can be shortened if need be. If you need to make it stronger, say there's, that there's multiple offers on this property and your buyer really, really wants it. And you have that fully underwritten approval, right? Say, okay, let's get it done in 10 days. So we can get all this stuff done in 10 days just to make it a little bit more appealing. Okay. You can shorten that time frame. Um, if somebody makes it longer, I always want to know why. What's the reason why? Um, but you can shorten those time frames. 17 is standard in this market right now. 17, we've been seeing 17. Okay. Before, there would be some like no contingencies or contingencies waived. But 17 right now is pretty standard where you just leave it kind of as is. Okay. So contingency waiver, removal or waiver of contingencies. This means that it is not that the buyer is effectively waiving all their contingencies and that their deposit could be non-refundable. We saw a lot of this in the 2020, 2021 market where it was, buyers were afraid of the risk of losing the property and not finding another one. So they just say, you know what, I'm going to take my chances. I'm waiving all my contingencies. So what? So be it. Don't do that. And I don't recommend it at all. So yeah, don't do that. It's not great for anybody. And I would say unless the buyer is just really stuck on something, we're not going to see it anytime soon. Okay. This is like competitive, highly competitive market, multiple offers. When we're looking at, our average sales price to list price was like 103%, right? So we're seeing multiple offers, those offers over ask. We're seeing a lot of that. We're not right now. So, okay, but you can leave everything blank right here. It's not really blank. It's already filled in, but it's no changes here. Okay, possession. So time of possession is upon recording. So once it records, once you get funding notification, you're like, yay, we're going to be on record today. Great. That is when ownership effectively transfers. And so once it records, now your buyer is the new owner. So we typically have what's standard is that when it records, the seller is already out of the property and they deliver keys over to the buyer, or you deliver keys to the buyer, and they can walk in with the property empty. Okay. If they need time, which sometimes sellers do, 6 p.m. is another standard time, 6 p.m. that night. So, hey, we're going to close escrow Friday. And the sellers are like, okay, we need the funds to close on our replacement property. We have to move out Friday as well. So then it can give you till 6 p.m. that night of closing. So that's also not uncommon either, to have it go a little bit longer. Okay. Or if there were another date. Now, if there were another date and say they needed a week to move out or a couple days, then you would need to make it a seller in possession. So it would have to be, let's see, let's do 3 days. So they needed over the weekend to move out. So you would do seller in possession for 3 days. And then automatically a SIP form is attached here. Okay. When the seller, what the buyer is doing, okay, it's not creating a tenancy. So the buyer is not saying, yes, you're now my tenant, seller. What they're giving is a license. So it's the same thing as, or very similar to like an Airbnb, or you rent a hall or something. You're giving a license to that person to occupy it for a short amount of time. It's not saying you have tenant rights. And so what this is saying is you have 3 days. I'll give you a license to stay there for 3 days. Okay. Or whatever time frame they need. If it goes over 29 days, okay, it is tenancy. So they are now, congratulations, you're a homeowner and a landlord. Okay. So if it's over 30 days, if you can avoid it at all costs, I would. It just gets a little bit sticky, but it does happen. There are times when the seller has to stay in possession longer and the buyer is okay with it. And so then it would be like a full lease agreement. They would create tenancy. So there's deposit, there's discussion of utilities and things like that. So these would be filled out here if they needed more time to move out, which is not uncommon. Okay, if there was a tenant in the property, tenant occupied property addendum would be marked there. Okay, any questions on contingencies, timeframes, or possession? Okay, all right, let's go to documents and time for performance. The seller has to provide all of the disclosures, all of the documents within 7 days after acceptance. Okay, it's important that these timeframes are important because sometimes the seller doesn't. Okay, they might not deliver all of the documents within a timely manner. And this comes up more often than not that we're getting down to the wire with buyer contingency removals, and the seller sends a notice to perform. And then, but the buyer's defense is, hey, we have an out because you never sent us all the disclosures, or you sent us an incomplete TDS or an incomplete SPQ. So it is important as a seller that they get the disclosures to us within 7 days. So be sure to follow up or have your TC follow up to make sure within those 7 days you get all of those disclosures. Okay. Secondly, what's important is once they deliver it to you, it's effectively delivered to the client as well. You're the representative of the client. And so if you get the documents right away and then you wait and you don't send them out to your client right away, and then the client reviews them and they're reviewing them on day 15 of day 17 contingency removal, and they're like, wait a minute, I didn't know that there was this item here. I didn't see it on the TDS. Well, seller delivered them, right? So it's really on us as the agent to get those to the buyer very quickly because we don't want them to have that additional loophole there. That we want the buyers to be able to see everything about the property and in a timely manner. Okay. So just be sure that when you go in a contract, that you get the documents quickly, all of the disclosures, and you have to review them before you send them to the client as well. So be sure to review them. So get the documents, get all the seller disclosures, and don't just have your TC send them to the client for signature. Look at them, review them, make sure everything looks okay. If they're like, yeah, there was a death in the property, and yes, there was a methamphetamine lab there, and yes, there was you want to make, and you're like, wait a minute, we didn't know this. Well, it wasn't on MLS. Of course not. They put in seller disclosures, right? So all of those things you need to be able to look out for and then convey it over to your client as well. And so what I would recommend, get the disclosures, get them quickly, review them quickly, and then there's different ways you can go over them with your buyer. I give buyers the option. I say, hey, I'll go over them with you. My TC is gonna send them quickly, right? Because I have my TC send them ASAP, just so it is out of my hands and into the buyer's hands. Okay. So buyer gets them quickly, and I say, okay, I'll review these with you. Call me, let's hop on a Zoom, or you can go over them and call me when you have questions. It's up to you. Sometimes buyers, they don't want they don't want to meet, right? They're busy. Nobody wants to get on a phone call anymore, right? They're busy. They're like, yeah, I don't do phone calls. Like I was born, I don't have a 19 in front of my birth date, so I don't talk on the phone, right? Okay, fine, whatever. Just whatever your choice is, I can go over them with you I can meet in person, I can go on Zoom, we can hop on a phone call, or you can go over them and call me with questions. Those are really the options that I give. And more often than not, it's the last one, right? I'm going to go over them and I'll let you know if I have questions. But up front, I say, hey, here's something that we didn't know. We didn't know. They're just telling me now that there is a, issue, or there was a death on the property, or there was a, whatever the case may be, right? I check up front before we have them sent off and say, hey, here's some things to be concerned with. Here's some things that let's address this in a request for repairs. And so my job is to look at that ahead of time and then have the buyer review them and sign them and accept them. I don't want my buyer calling me, asking me about things or bringing up concerns. It should be the other way around. It should be, as the agent, you're reviewing them, you're advising on what's normal, what's not, what's okay, is this good to go, right? So yeah, 7 days for delivery. So if they deliver them late, right? So say we're past our contingency period, the buyer has 5 days to review. So if they deliver them on day 17, that starts the clock over and we have 5 more days to review. So just kind of a heads up. Same thing on if you have the listing side, get those as quick as possible. I take the listing and I send out disclosures for them to fill out and sign, just so I have them. So I have all the disclosures like right away. That way there's no time lapse, and we want to make sure that everybody knows everything as quick as possible. Like that's the motto, right? Everyone should know everything as quick as possible so that way we can move forward. It's delaying doesn't do anyone any good. Delaying getting disclosure signed doesn't do any good. Delaying reviewing, it doesn't do anyone any favors. So get them done as quickly as possible. Okay, moving on from that, we have items included or excluded in the sale. So you can have anything or everything included. Just be sure that when you go through this, that if they want something, that you do mark that it is left in here. Some of the explanation of fixtures in the RPA, so we'll look at a little further down. It says anything attached to the property is included in the property, right? Anything mounted. Now, this though, it has to be marked because it's kind of contradictory because in the contract, on some of the pages further down, it says that that anything affixed to the property is attached. Well, if this isn't marked, then the seller's like, well, no, you didn't mark it. So we took all of the TV, all of the things that were mounted in, but you didn't tell us. And so they're conflicting. So, this honestly should probably be changed, but for the time being, just double check if there's something that they want on the property, even if it looks like it's affixed or should be, just be sure to add it in here. Especially like things that are, that look like, okay, they're bolted down, but I'm not sure if they're attached. If they want them or they don't want it, be sure to include or exclude. So let's see. Let's say we want the play set in the backyard. And we don't want the above ground pool. So remove the pool, leave the playset. Okay. So anything that's unclear or uncertain, go over with your client, see if they want it. And then we can add in, they want the refrigerator, stove, washer, dryer, anything here. The video doorbells is another one. And then the EV charging systems too. Be sure to mark if they want them or don't, if they want them excluded. And then potted trees and shrubs. This one you can put in. Okay, so you can do something like this. I had it recently where they were unclear about which ones. Like, no, we didn't want this certain kind and we wanted this kind. And it's like, okay, so just be sure clarity in this one. Okay. Okay, now any questions on items included or excluded? Okay, cool. Allocation of costs. So this is the standard, I'll give you guys standard how we do it. NHD report, natural hazard disclosure report, seller pays for it, and provided by, we put seller's choice. Sellers, by law, they have to provide all known information of any natural hazard, and any natural hazards, tax information if it's in a fire zone, earthquake zone, etc. So NHD report is just a very easy way to have that information provided, and it's easier for the buyer to read as well. So, if there were any other additional reports, this is where on my my VA deals, I do termite report. Okay. Because I'm letting the agent know, hey, we're getting a termite report, it's VA. When you're doing a VA, it is required, and it's one of the VA requirements that it's free of active infestation. So there's no termites on the property. And so that is required. So I put that in there. And this would also be a roof report. Okay. Now, you don't have to put anything. The buyer can do their investigations. Nothing has to be put there. So if it is just a conventional deal, I leave it blank. I don't put anything in there. If it's conventional, you can leave it completely blank. I do put it in there if it is a VA, or if maybe there's like an issue with the roof or something questionable. If there's anything like that stands out or is a little odd, then I will add it in there. Okay. But other than that, I just leave it blank and we get our reports anyway. So you don't have to disclose up front what reports you're getting. Buyers open to getting any reports and doing their investigations on the property. All right, smoke alarm, carbon monoxide detectors, or water heater bracing. It's typical that the seller does pay for that. So you can mark seller there. Escrow and title fees, or escrow fee, excuse me, but each will pay their own fees. I like to put here seller's choice escrow holder, because let's see. The reason why is when you take a listing or when somebody takes a listing or if you take a listing, a lot of the due diligence is done up front, where there is the prelim is pulled and they pull a payoff demand and you make sure the listing is doing all this work up front with this title company and escrow company. And so we typically will just leave it there with the current escrow company. So we just put seller's choice. And I do like to ask a lot of times, sometimes they won't give it to me for whatever reason, but I'll always ask, hey, what is the name of the escrow company? Or you have it pre-opened? That way I just put it in there and it makes it a lot easier. Plus, I like to, when I'm writing an offer, I like to make it as easy for the seller to say yes, right? I try to make it as nice as possible, as easy for the seller so that they're more inclined to say yes. So it's just little things like that that make a difference. I know because I use it like when I'm on the listing side, I like the buyer's agents to ask me, hey, who did you have escrow pre-open with? What's the title company that you're using? I really like that communication because it just it sets the tone for the relationship working for. So I have two offers and I have one not so strong offer and the agent I haven't heard from and they send me a weird offer versus another agent who's communicating. They're asking, who I have pre-opened with. They're communicating. It sets the tone for the working relationship. And I think communication is really important, especially when, sometimes it's buyer and seller. We get in the middle and we're trying to make everybody happy and make it a win-win. And we're trying to negotiate. Well, it's hard when it's someone who doesn't communicate versus somebody who communicates like, all right, let's get the deal done. Like, let's make it work for both of our clients because they really want to sell, they really want to buy. And so we have to come to an agreement in the middle. And so I like to ask because I like when they ask me. So it just makes it a little bit easier. Okay. County transfer tax, seller, it's common that the seller pay for that, and city transfer tax. Okay, so that is marked there. If there's usually not HOA transfer fees, but each could pay their own if there was an HOA. Okay. We don't typically see a lot of the private transfer fees. If there was a septic or well, propane tank, or boundaries. Okay, so this would be a separate form that gets attached. It's a newer one, so this just came out with the new release. But we don't have to mark that there. Another little blank mark here for fees or costs. If there were any additional fees or costs, it's just another area where you could put something there. If it were, yeah, anything additional would be put in there, any miscellaneous. Okay. Home warranty. This one can go either way. It really will be up to the discussion with you and the listing agent who's going to pay for what. You can say, hey, the buyer's going to pay for the home warranty and they want the HVAC included, or maybe we have a pool, the pool included. Okay. And if there were other terms here, maybe the seller had agreed up front to pay for the Section 1 clearance. So not only the termite report, but the Section 1 clearance. So you can add anything additional here. Okay. Okay. Any questions on who's paying for what?
I have a question.
Sure.
Do you recommend have or having the TC? Or is it required?
New agents, it's required, and I recommend it. I mean, it is I recommend, okay, so you have to, as a brand new agent and launch, you have to have a TC. So it's required. Um, Moving forward, I highly recommend it because it's cost effective, right? Um, and it helps to keep everything on track and everything in line. So, I wouldn't, I used to, okay, so before I came to KW, so I started Keller Williams in 2013. Prior to that, I TC'd all my own deals. I don't know why. And I started, and my TL was like, don't. Why are you doing that? And I'm like, well, I don't know. I just always have, I like it a certain way. And she's like, you're spending so much time doing it. Don't go lead gen, go this. I'm like, okay, I'm used to doing it like my own way and I don't mind the paperwork. She's like, no, go lead gen. Don't spend your time on TC. And she was right. 100% right. I was like, why didn't I do this 10 years before this, right? Why have I been working my whole entire career not having a TC? So it makes a lot of sense to have a TC because they are just doing the administrative type work that takes a long time and it's super tedious to draw up all of the disclosures. We need to know the meat of it. You need to know the substance of it. But as far as putting all of it together, no. Your time as an agent is better served doing lead generation, reviewing the contracts, learning the substance of what you're doing, than to do just the paperwork. So it's really you have to know it, but you don't have to do all of the paperwork of it, you know?
I see.
Yeah. So I would not I don't think it's worth the agent's time to TC, and it's not that expensive either. You know, $500, $600 to have everything in compliance and just have that headache, you know, that extra added work. I mean, it's hours. It's hours and hours of admin work that you don't have
Mhm.
to do. So, yeah,
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome. Okay. All right. We're getting down to the end. Now, this form here, if there were any additional addendums or advisories, they would be attached here. These aren't typical. And so the contract that we have is just a very typical contract that you'll see, either conventional or FHA. And all of those forms, and it's drafted just a kind of a clean offer the way that it's drafted. So these are kind of if there's anything odd or unusual, if it was probate, if it was, you know, an REO, if there were any other things like that, stock co-op, tenancy in common, purchase, so all kind of, you know, manufactured home, that's what would attach here. Okay, we'll go over some of these. And this is all, the rest of the contract isn't anything that needs to be filled out. This is all just clarification on all of the items that we filled out. So, so the deposit here, this is kind of an important thing, the initial deposit. It explains that it's delivered directly to escrow holder. And like I explained before, escrow is the neutral third party. So they hold the funds and then they just go off direction of what the buyer and seller mutually say to do. So they don't make any decisions by themselves. They don't say, yeah, I think that the buyer should get the deposit back, or I think it goes to the seller. They have to have mutually executed instructions from both buyer and seller in order to do anything at all. So that's the position of the escrow holder. Um, so if the yeah, so that's what yeah. Okay. Let's see. Oh, it talks about the first loan. Let me see what else I want to cover. Condition of property at closing. This is kind of a big one that comes up. Properties to be delivered as is in its present physical condition as of the date of acceptance. And so when you do that final walkthrough with the buyer, it's as is present physical condition. And so, right now, summertime, it's hot outside. The seller's not mowing the lawn, or not watering the lawn or the grass, and everything kind of dies. It should not be that. It should be in this present physical condition. So when you do the walkthrough, it's like, hey, hey seller, it's, the pool's green and it wasn't, so we need to remedy that. And so it is, if the pool was blue and sparkly and clean when you wrote the offer, and you do your final walkthrough and it's not, then they have to remedy it. So that's why we try and do it 5 days or more before the close of escrow date. That's to fix anything like this. If there's anything that doesn't look like it's going to be remedied, then that's when you can start and say, hey, you have to have the seller fix these things. So seller to remain in possession after close of escrow, like we said, we had talked a little about the SIP, so the seller remaining in possession. So the difference between the just under 29 days is just the license of tenancy versus the 29 or more. So 30 days is creating tenancy. Let's see what else. So what happens if the contingency is removed and then the buyer wants to cancel? So I have the discussion with my buyer after we do, say we've reviewed all seller disclosures, everything looks good. We've got the appraisal, looks good, at value, no conditions, loan is approved, everything looks great, buyers want to move forward. We send off the final contingent, the full contingency removal. That's removing all contingencies. Now, I warn my buyer that, hey, if you remove all contingencies here and you decide to cancel later, your deposit could be non-refundable because you're telling the seller that it's no longer contingent on any of these items and that you're moving forward. So not moving forward is a breach of contracts. If you want to cancel, the seller could say, no, you need to buy it. Right. So there's different issues that can happen. So it does get a little sticky. So I recommend, and I have the discussion with my buyer, like, hey, you got to, if we don't move forward with this, then you could potentially lose this deposit. It could potentially be non-refundable if you don't perform. And so we have that discussion up front. So just don't send off, your full contingency removal to your buyer without having that discussion of what that includes, because you don't want it to come back and they say, actually, we want to buy another property. We found one down the street and it has a pool and it's, it's $10,000 cheaper and, we want it. You say, okay, well, you're in contract here and you remove contingency. So yeah, so just be sure to have that conversation, what could happen. Additionally, with your sellers too, sellers do not, once they agree to sell, they don't have, the only out that they have out of the contract is if the buyer doesn't perform. So sellers don't really have a way to cancel the agreement without breaching the agreement, right? Buyers are doing their investigations, they're putting out money for their inspections, appraisal, and the seller can't say, well, actually, we changed our mind. Like, no, there's going to be issues because the seller cannot. The sellers agreed to it. The only exception is buyer's contingency. Other than that, the contract, the way it was written and accepted, is the contract. Okay, let's see. We talked a little bit about what's included in the sale and what's excluded. So just be sure that anything that you want included is specified up front in the offer, or if there's things that come up later, you can make certain in an addendum or an amendment of the things that you want to make sure are included in the property. So just be sure in writing that anything is included. Okay. The buyer is required to provide any reports from all investigations to the seller. So just be sure to, if you do send a request for repairs, send those over. It is in the contract. Buyers sometimes will say, no, I'm not going to send it. They're mine. I paid for them. They're mine. They belong to me. Which is true in a sense, but it also states in the contract explicitly that they do have to provide all those to the seller. So buyer's technically supposed to turn everything over. We've had it happen. It actually was not that long ago. Buyer was like, I'm not giving them. And we said, okay, well, we're advising you to give them. And if you don't, okay, you're acting against our advice. And so there is a letter. I've sent it quite often when we advise to a client to do something and they don't take our advice, for us to not be in trouble, there is a letter that we can send that says you're acting against advice of the broker. So we say, hey, we've told you this. We said you need to disclose this. If you haven't, you're acting against our advice. And that puts us not liable. So that shifts it off and says, hey, we've told you what to do. And if you're not, that's up to you. You know, you're going against the advice of what we've told you to do, but you can do so at your discretion. So we're not, we're not in control of your actions. We've advised, and then that's it. Okay, let's see if there's anything else I want to touch on. I think that was it. We talked about the termination rights, cancellation. Okay, I talked a little about the buyer investigations. Okay, I think that is it. Oh, one last thing. So, if actually, I'm not going to cover that right now because it'll be in depth, but we're going to cover it next week. So, okay, I think that is it.